Disclaimer: this is a fictional dramatization created for artistic, emotional, and educational storytelling purposes. All characters and events are entirely fictional and created using AI tools. No impersonation, misrepresentation, or harm is intended. The content contains scenes of danger involving child characters. However, no real persons or minors were involved in its production. Grace's Love Stories produces scripted, AI-generated stories that promote, entertain, inspire kindness, and emotional connection. We respect our viewers and strictly adhere to YouTube's policies.
The moon meant nothing here. It hung outside the high, narrow windows of the citadel, a sterile disk of white in a sky the color of a fresh bruise. But its light could not penetrate the gloom of the throne room. Here, the only light came from dying embers in a cavernous hearth and the cold glint of polished granite. The air tasted of dust, beeswax, and something else, something metallic and old that clung to the stones like a memory of blood. My borrowed gown, a scratchy thing of dark wool, did little to ward off the chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. This was a cold that radiated from the throne itself. They said the king's grief had frozen the very heart of the castle, and standing here, I believed them. I was a ghost brought to haunt a ghost, a remnant of a war he had won, but a peace he had lost. The silence was the worst part, a heavy, suffocating blanket that pressed down on the whispers and rustling silks of the court. And at the center of that silence sat the king, a man whose legend was now a cautionary tale. They were about to offer me to him, not as a woman, but as a remedy, a scarred, broken vessel meant to hold a new future. I clutched my hands together, knuckles white, and waited for the axe to fall. My name, Celine Draven, was spoken by a man whose own name I didn't care to know. He was Lord Boren, a member of the High Council, his voice as dry as winter leaves. Your Majesty, as we have decreed, an Omega to secure the Velhart line. From the Draven Pack of the Southern Territories, a survivor of the Red Creek incursion. His words hung in the air, each one a stone cast at me. Decreed. Secure. Survivor. I was not a person. I was a political maneuver, a broodmare chosen from the rubble. I kept my eyes fixed on a point on the floor somewhere between me and the dais, a crack in the marble that looked like a lightning strike. To look up felt like a final surrender. The court watched. I could feel their eyes on me, 100 pinpricks of morbid curiosity. They saw the ill-fitting gown, borrowed from a servant because none of the court ladies' finery would do. They saw the way I held myself, too stiff, too still, a wild thing caught in a snare. And I knew without a doubt they saw the scars. The slick, puckered skin that trailed from my left temple down my neck, disappearing into the collar of the gown. The worst of them, a lattice of burns across my back and shoulder, was hidden, but this one was my brand. It declared me as damaged goods. Whispers slithered through the silence. So pale. The Draven girl? I thought they were all gone. Look at her face. Is she even whole? A barren Omega, I hear. The fires took her womb. Each whisper was a fresh lash. They weren't wrong. The healers had said as much after they pulled me from the burning lodge. The fires of the rebellion had taken my family, my pack, my voice for a time, and the very future I might have carried. I was an empty vessel, a flawed offering for a broken king. Why had they chosen me? Perhaps because my brokenness mirrored his own. A shattered queen for a shattered king. There was a cruel poetry to it. I risked a glance upward, not at the throne, but at the tapestries flanking it. They depicted glorious hunts, vibrant scenes of alphas in their prime, their wolves running alongside them, a symphony of power and life. They were a mockery of the man who now sat between them. King Rowan Veilheart. He hadn't moved. He hadn't spoken. He hadn't so much as inclined his head. He was a statue carved from grief. The stories they told about him in the territories were terrifying. They said he had single-handedly torn the throat from the rebel leader, that his rage had been a physical storm on the battlefield. But they also said that when he found his Luna, Lyra, dead in the aftermath, something inside him had shattered. The conquering Alpha had died with her, leaving only this hollow monarch in his place. They said his wolf had fallen silent that day, a death within a death from which no shifter could ever truly recover. Lord Boren cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud. Your Majesty, the girl awaits your acknowledgement. Still nothing. The silence stretched, becoming an act of cruelty. I felt a flush of heat crawl up my neck, a burning shame that was worse than the pain of any wound. I was being offered, and he wouldn't even look at me. I was so far beneath his notice that I wasn't even worthy of a dismissal. I was air. I was nothing. My wolf, a timid, shivering creature that had huddled in the back of my soul since the fires, whimpered. She was a shadow of what she should have been. As an omega, her purpose was peace, nurturing, the quiet heart of a pack. But she had known only violence and loss. Now, faced with this immense, deadened power, she wanted to flee. My gaze was finally, unwillingly, drawn to him. He was larger than I had imagined. Even slouched as he was on the massive throne of ironwood and gold, the crown on his head was a simple circlet of black and silver, not the opulent monstrosity his father had worn. It looked less like a symbol of power and more like a band of penance. His hair was the color of dark earth, long and untamed, falling around a face that was all harsh angles and shadows. A jagged scar cut through one eyebrow, a white line against his tanned skin. But it was his eyes that held the room captive. They were the color of a winter sky before a blizzard, a flat, lifeless gray. There was nothing in them. No anger, no sorrow, no interest. Just an absence. And then he blinked, slowly, as if waking from a long and terrible dream. His gaze, which had been fixed on some distant point of memory, drifted downwards. It swept over Lord Baran with disinterest, over the other council members, over the silent, watching court, and then it landed on me. The world stopped. The air thickened, growing heavy and charged, like the moment before a lightning strike. The whispers died. The rustling of fabric ceased. Even the embers in the hearth seemed to hush. His eyes, those dead gray eyes, fixed on mine. And for the first time in what felt like an eternity, they were no longer empty. Something flickered in their depths. A spark, a glint of something ancient and wild that had been sleeping for a very, very long time. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't look away. It felt as if a physical cord had snapped taut between us, pulling me forward, anchoring me in place. The scent in the air changed. The dust and beeswax were burned away by a sudden, sharp fragrance I couldn't place. It smelled of ozone, of cold mountain stone, and the deep, loamy scent of a forest after a storm. It was the scent of a dominant alpha, but muted, as if coming from a great distance. And deep within me, where my own wolf had been sleeping her frightened, troubled sleep, something stirred. She lifted her head. She sniffed the air. She didn't whimper. She didn't cower. She let out a low, questioning whine that only I could hear. The king's posture shifted. It was a minute change, a straightening of his spine, but the effect was profound. The illusion of the broken statue shattered, replaced by the terrifying presence of a predator. His hands, which had been resting limply on the arms of the throne, curled into fists. His knuckles turned white, a muscle feathered in his jaw. He was seeing me, not just the Omega presented for his approval, but me. His gaze traveled from my eyes down to the scar on my neck, and his expression tightened almost imperceptibly. It wasn't disgust. It was something else, something I couldn't name. Lord Boren, oblivious to the silent, violent shift in the room's atmosphere, took it as a sign of progress. She is of good stock, Your Majesty. Strong, despite her ordeal. She will serve the throne well. He gestured to me again, as if showcasing a mare. Present yourself, girl. Let the king see what he is getting. My blood ran cold. He wanted me to turn, to show them the full map of my ruin. It was the ultimate humiliation. I squeezed my eyes shut for a second, a silent prayer for the floor to swallow me whole. But there was no escape. Slowly, woodenly, I began to turn. No. The word was a shockwave. It wasn't loud. It was a low, rough sound, ripped from a throat long unused. A gravelly resonance that vibrated through the stone floor and up into my bones. Every head in the room snapped toward the throne. King Rowan Veilheart was leaning forward, his elbows on his knees. The lifeless mask had been obliterated, replaced by an expression of sharp, cold fury. His winter gray eyes were no longer fixed on me. They were pinned on Lord Boren, and they blazed with a light that was anything but dead. Lord Boren actually flinched, taking a half step back. Your Majesty, he stammered, his composure cracking. The king did not answer him. His gaze shifted back to me, and the fire in them softened, just a fraction, replaced by that same unreadable, intense focus. He looked at me as if I were the only person in the cavernous hall, as if the council and the court had all faded into mist. And then I heard it. It wasn't a sound for human ears. It was a feeling, a deep, primal thrumming in my chest, an echo in my blood. It was the barest whisper of a growl, a rumble so low it was more vibration than noise. It came from him, from the silent, sleeping beast inside the king. His wolf. His wolf was answering mine. The court must have felt it too. A collective gasp went through the room. Shifters shuffled their feet, their own wolves reacting to the sudden, unexpected display of dominance from a power they had thought dormant, if not dead. Lord Boren paled. Majesty, the decree is for the good of the realm. A new Luna is needed to— I heard the decree, Rowan interrupted, his voice stronger now, cutting through Boren's words like steel. He finally rose from the throne. He unfolded to his full, formidable height, and the air was stolen from my lungs. He was immense, a giant of a man, broad-shouldered and powerful, moving with a predator's grace that belied his long stillness. The crown seemed insignificant on him now. He was the crown. He was the power. He descended the few steps of the dais, his heavy boots making no sound on the marble. The court parted before him like the sea. He stopped a few feet in front of me. The scent of storm and stone was overwhelming. It filled my head, dizzying me, intoxicating me. My pathetic little wolf was on her feet now, tail wagging with a tentative, bewildered hope. He was so close I could see the flecks of silver in his gray eyes, the faint stubble on his jaw, the tension in the line of his mouth. He did not look at my scar. He looked directly into my eyes, and for a breathless moment, I felt as if he could see every fear, every loss, every broken piece of my soul. And he did not look away. He lifted a hand and I flinched, a lifetime of expecting blows ingrained in my bones. But he didn't touch me. He simply raised it slightly, a silent command for me to be still. His gaze flickered once more to Lord Boren, who stood gaping like a fish. The low growl rumbled in his chest again, louder this time, a clear and unmistakable warning. A claim, then turning his back on the entire assembly, he looked down at me, the broken offering. His voice was quiet, meant only for me, yet it echoed with the weight of a royal command that would change everything. Leave us. The great iron-strapped doors of the throne room slammed shut, the sound of booming finality that echoed off the high stone vaults. The noise hammered against the sudden, terrifying silence, sealing me inside with him. The footsteps of the departing court faded into nothing, leaving only the soft crackle of the embers in the hearth and the frantic, suffocating beat of my own heart. I was trapped. The public humiliation was over. The private one was about to begin. I squeezed my hands together so tightly my knuckles ached, bracing myself for the dismissal, for the cold words that would cast me back into the darkness from whence I came. He didn't move for a long moment, simply stood there, a dark monolith against the distant firelight. The air between us was a living thing, thick with unspoken history, and a raw, thrumming energy that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. His scent, that intoxicating mix of storm and mountain, was stronger now, a constant presence that both terrified me and soothed a part of me I thought had long since died. My wolf, who had been cowed and silent for 3 years, was alert, pacing the confines of my soul. Her head raised, her senses fixed entirely on the alpha before us. She was not afraid of him. That, more than anything, set me on edge. Slowly he began to walk toward me. Each step was deliberate, measured, the soft fall of his leather boots on the marble the only sound in the world. I held my ground, though every instinct screamed at me to bolt. But where would I go? I was a prisoner here as much as a guest. To run would be to invite a chase, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled my blood, that I would not win. He stopped an arm's length away. So close now I had to tilt my head back to meet his gaze. The sheer scale of him was overwhelming. He was a creature of legend, built of corded muscle and old sorrows, his shadow swallowing me whole. The grief had not made him soft. It had honed him to a razor's edge. I could see the fine lines of exhaustion around his eyes, the grim set of his mouth. This was a king who did not sleep. "They brought me a broken Omega," he said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through my chest. It wasn't a question or an accusation, it was a statement of fact, as plain and cold as the stone beneath my feet. I flinched, the word broken striking me like a physical blow. I lowered my eyes to the floor again, the shame washing over me in a hot, sickening wave. "Yes, Your Majesty," I managed to whisper, my voice a dry rasp. "Look at me," he commanded. It was not a shout, but the quiet authority in it was absolute. It brooked no argument. With a trembling that started in my knees and worked its way up my spine, I forced my gaze upward once more. His gray eyes were like polished steel, intense and unreadable. He was studying me, his focus so absolute it felt as if he were peeling back my skin, layer by layer, looking for the truth of me beneath the scars and the fear. "Lord Borean announced your pack," he continued, his voice still low and gravelly. "He did not give me your name." The question threw me. I had expected a dismissal, a condemnation, not a request for an identity I barely felt I owned anymore. "It is Celine, Your Majesty, Celine Draven." "Celine," he repeated, tasting the word. It sounded strange in his mouth, an ancient name spoken by an ancient power. He took another step closer, and my breath hitched. He was so near now, I could feel the heat radiating from his body. He lifted a hand, and I couldn't stop the violent flinch that seized me, my body instinctively recoiling, my eyes squeezing shut in anticipation of a strike. His hand stopped. When I dared to open my eyes, he was watching my reaction, and a flicker of something dark and painful crossed his face. His hand remained frozen in the air between us, fingers slightly curled. He didn't touch me. He held the position for a heartbeat, a silent acknowledgement of the fear he had seen in me. Then, with excruciating slowness, he lowered his arm back to his side. The gesture was a reprieve, a small unspoken apology that left me more shaken than a blow would have. "The fire did that," he stated, his gaze now fixed on the scar that marred my temple and neck, the Red Creek incursion. I could only nod, my throat too tight for words. The memory rose like bile. The smell of burning pine and flesh, the screams, the heat that had peeled the world away into agony. "I was there," he said, and the words were heavy, each one a tombstone. "After, I walked the ashes of your home." My head snapped up. I stared at him, my shock overriding my fear. He had been there? He had seen the devastation, the ruin of my entire world? His eyes were distant now, looking at something only he could see, a landscape of smoke and ghosts. "We were told the King's Guard arrived too late," I whispered. "We did," he said, his voice raw. The muscle in his jaw clenched. "My mate, my Luna, died on a different front that same night. The rebellion was a hydra. We cut off one head and 2 more attacked." He looked back at me, his gaze sharp and piercing once more. "They see a scar. They don't see the pyre it was forged in." A tremor went through me. He understood. In that one sentence, he swept aside the court's disgust, the whispers of damaged, and saw not the flaw, but the cause. He saw a fellow survivor of the same war that had shattered his own world. We were 2 sides of the same ruined coin. His wolf, I realized, was still present, a low thrum of power just beneath his skin. It was watching my wolf through his eyes, and the connection was undeniable. A strange sense of calm began to settle over me, pushing back the edges of my terror. It was his scent, his presence. The Omega in me, the part that craved stability and a strong center, was responding to the formidable, unshakable core of the Alpha in him. Even an Alpha steeped in grief, it was a primal, unnerving peace. Why me? The question escaped me before I could stop it. It was insolent, improper. A piece of chattel did not question its disposition. A flicker of something, surprise, admiration, passed through his eyes. "The Council believes an Omega's presence will soothe the unrest in the realm, that a new queen, even in name only, will signify a return to stability. They scoured the territories for a survivor of a loyal pack, one with no political ties that could challenge their own power." His lips twisted into a bitter, humorless smile. You, Celine Draven, are conveniently, perfectly, alone. You are a symbol, nothing more. It was a cruel truth, but hearing it from him was somehow less painful than the council's flowery justifications. He was not trying to deceive me. He was giving me the respect of a blunt, unvarnished explanation. And Baron, I added, my voice barely audible. They chose a Baron Omega to secure the Veilheart line. It makes no sense. I needed him to know. I needed him to see the full extent of the flawed offering so he could send me away, and this ordeal could be over. Rowan's eyes narrowed. They told you that? The healers did. The fire, it burned too deep. The admission hung in the air between us. The most shameful secret of my soul laid bare. An Omega who could not bear pups was a failure of her very nature. His gaze dropped from my face, sweeping down my body in a slow, assessing appraisal that was not lustful, but analytical. It felt as if he were taking my measure, weighing my worth on a scale I couldn't comprehend. When his eyes returned to my face, they were burning with a new cold fire. The council is made of fools, he said, his voice lethally quiet. They play their games with broken pieces, thinking they control the board. They brought you here as a pawn. He took the final step that closed the space between us, and this time I did not flinch away. He reached out, his calloused fingers gently brushing a loose strand of hair from my cheek. The touch was electric, a jolt of warmth that shot straight to my core. It was the first gentle touch I had felt in 3 years. They are mistaken. My breath caught. My wolf whined softly, a sound of pure, bewildered pleasure. You are not a symbol, he growled, his thumb tracing the line of my jaw, his gaze holding mine captive. And you are not their pawn. He leaned in closer, his lips near my ear. I could feel his breath, warm against my skin. The scent of storm and stone was all-encompassing, clouding my thoughts, overwhelming my senses. It felt like coming home to a place I had never been. You will be moved to the Luna's chambers, he murmured, his voice a low, possessive command that sent a shiver through me. You will dine with me tonight, alone. He pulled back slightly, his hand still cupping my jaw, his thumb stroking my skin. His winter eyes searched mine, looking for something. Defiance? Acceptance? I didn't know. I was too lost in the dizzying, terrifying feeling of being claimed. And Celine, he added, his voice dropping even lower, a velvet rumble of absolute authority. You will wear something that is not the rags they insult you with. The Queen's jewels are yours now. I expect you to wear them. The King's command echoed in the sudden emptiness of the throne room. 2 figures materialized from the shadows near the great doors. A stern, gray-haired woman in the severe black dress of a head housekeeper, and a younger maid who kept her eyes glued to the floor. They approached me without a word, their movements efficient and devoid of warmth. I was no longer a person to them, but a task to be completed, an object to be moved. This way, the older woman, Elspeth, said, her voice as starched as her collar. There was no my lady, no title of respect. I was simply this way. I followed them out of the throne room and into the labyrinthine corridors of the citadel. The walk was a silent ordeal. Their backs were ramrod straight, their footsteps a quiet, disapproving cadence on the stone floors. I felt the weight of their unspoken judgment with every step. I was the usurper, the scarred Omega from the territories, come to defile the sacred memory of their beloved Luna Lyra. The tapestries we passed now seemed to mock me, their vibrant scenes of life and love, a stark contrast to the hollow shell I felt I had become. The Luna's chambers were in the highest spire of the castle, overlooking the sleeping city and the dark ribbon of the river below. The doors were carved from pale wood, inlaid with silver symbols of the moon in all its phases. Elspeth opened them with a heavy iron key and pushed them inward, stepping aside to let me pass. I stopped on the threshold, my breath catching in my throat. The room was a shrine. It was breathtakingly beautiful, but it was not empty. It was filled with the ghost of another woman. A massive 4-poster bed dominated the space, draped in fabrics the color of midnight and silver. A vast hearth, cold and dark now, was framed by a mantle of white marble. French doors stood open to a stone balcony, and the night breeze stirred the sheer curtains, carrying the scent of night-blooming jasmine and cold stone. But beneath it all was another fragrance, faint but pervasive, the scent of dried roses and a light, sweet perfume that was distinctly, hauntingly feminine. It was her scent, Lyra's. "Your bath is drawn," Elspeth stated, gesturing toward an adjoining room. "Gowns have been laid out. You are to be ready for the king in 1 hour." The younger maid scurried to a large wardrobe and opened it, revealing a breathtaking collection of dresses. Silks, velvets, and brocades in every color imaginable hung in perfect rows, a rainbow of wealth and status. They were all made for a woman of perfect, unblemished beauty. A woman who was not me. I walked numbly toward the wardrobe, my hand hovering over a gown of emerald green silk. It was exquisite. It would also cling to every ridge and valley of the burn scars that covered my back. I have nothing of my own," I stammered, feeling the foolishness of the words as soon as they left my lips. Of course I didn't. Everything I owned had turned to ash. "You will wear what is provided," Elspeth said, her tone leaving no room for argument. She pointed to a gown laid out on the bed. It was a deep charcoal gray, almost black, with long sleeves and a high collar. It was the most conservative of the choices, designed to cover, to hide. It was a gown for a ghost, a perfect choice. They left me then, closing the door with a soft click. Alone in the dead Luna's chambers, I felt like a trespasser of the highest order. I moved as if in a dream, my feet sinking into the plush carpets. On the vanity table, a silver-backed brush lay next to a crystal bottle of the perfume I had smelled. I picked up the brush, my fingers trembling. Caught in the bristles was a single long strand of silver blonde hair. A sob caught in my throat. I was not just in her room. I was being asked to step into her skin. The bath was hot and scented with lavender, meant to soothe, but it only made my skin prickle with awareness. I washed away the grime of the journey and the lingering scent of fear from the throne room, but I could not wash away the scars. When I stepped out, wrapped in a thick towel, I caught my reflection in the large, gilt-edged mirror. I saw a pale, thin creature, her body a roadmap of past pain. The scar on my face was a pale river, but the ones on my back and shoulder were a violent, puckered landscape. I dressed quickly, pulling on the gray gown. The silk was cool and heavy against my skin. It fit, surprisingly well, but it felt like a costume, a lie. My eyes fell upon a heavy box of polished rosewood sitting on a small table. The king's last command, "The queen's jewels are yours now." My hands shook as I lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of black velvet, lay a fortune. Diamonds glittered like trapped starlight. Sapphires shone with the depth of the midnight sky, but my gaze was drawn to the centerpiece, a magnificent necklace of platinum and moonstones. A single pear-shaped diamond hung from the center, so clear and brilliant it seemed to weep light. I knew it from the portraits I had seen of the royal line, the queen's tear. It was Lyra's most famous possession. With a sense of dread and inevitability, I lifted it from the baucase. It was cold and heavy in my hands. I fastened it around my neck. The cool weight of the metal settled against my collarbones, the great diamond resting in the hollow of my throat. I looked in the mirror again. The sight was grotesque. The breathtaking beauty of the necklace only served to highlight the jagged, ugly scar that snaked down my neck beside it. It was a pairing of perfection and ruin, a jewel on a corpse. A soft knock came at the door. "The king awaits you," Elspeth's voice called out, muffled by the thick wood. The private dining room was smaller, more intimate than the cavernous throne room, but no less intimidating. A long table, polished to a mirror shine, was set for two. A fire blazed in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on the stone walls and glinting off the silver cutlery. Rowan was already there, standing by the fire, one hand resting on the mantel. He had changed out of his formal court attire and into a simple black tunic and trousers. Without the crown and heavy robes, he looked less like a king and more like what he was at his core, a warrior, a predator. He turned as I entered, and his gray eyes swept over me. His gaze lingered for a moment on the necklace, then on the scar beside it. His expression was unreadable, a mask of stone. "The color suits you," he said, his voice a low murmur that seemed to fill the room. He gestured to the table, and I took a seat, my movements stiff and awkward. He sat opposite me, not at the far end of the long table, but directly across. The proximity was unsettling. I could feel his presence like a physical force. a gravity that pulled all the air in the room toward him. Servants appeared, silent as specters, placing plates of roasted quail, steamed vegetables, and fresh bread before us. They filled our goblets with dark red wine, and then vanished as quietly as they had come. The silence that followed was deafening. I stared at the food on my plate, my stomach a tight knot of anxiety. I couldn't eat. I couldn't even bring myself to lift my fork. "You fear me," Rowan stated. It was the same observation as before, but this time it felt different, softer. "You are the king," I whispered, my eyes fixed on my plate. "I was a man long before I was a king," he replied. "And my wolf, he does not understand fear from you. He only understands recognition." I looked up at that, my curiosity warring with my fear. "Recognition?" He leaned forward, his forearms resting on the table. The firelight carved his face into harsh planes and deep shadows. "For 3 years, Celine, my wolf has been silent. A dead thing in a living cage. Since the day Lyra died, he has not stirred. Not for a challenge, not for a hunt, not for the call of the moon. I thought he was gone forever." His gaze was so intense it felt like a physical touch. "Until I saw you today, when my eyes met yours in the throne room," he howled. "For the first time in 3 years, I heard him. I was stunned into silence." His confession was a raw, vulnerable thing, a glimpse into the profound grief that had hollowed him out. My own wolf, who had been quiet but alert, stirred with a powerful wave of sympathy. An Omega's instinct to soothe an Alpha's pain rose in me, so strong it was dizzying. "I do not understand it," he admitted, his voice rough with a confusion that mirrored my own. "The council brought you to me as a political solution, a broodmare, but my wolf sees something else." "I am nothing," I breathed, the words tasting of ash, a remnant, a broken thing. "Stop saying that," he growled. The sound a low vibration that made the goblet next to my hand tremble. His control snapped for a moment, and the predator was back, his eyes flashing with a possessive fire. "You survived. That is not nothing. That is everything." My hand resting on the table began to tremble. I tried to still it, clenching it into a fist, but the tremor continued, a testament to the storm of emotions raging inside me. Rowan's eyes followed the movement, his expression tightening. He saw my struggle, my weakness, my fear. He pushed his chair back and rose, his movements fluid and silent. Before I could react, he had rounded the table and was standing behind my chair. I stiffened, my entire body going rigid, expecting I didn't know what. He placed his large, warm hands on my shoulders. The touch was firm, grounding, sending a jolt of heat through the silk of my gown and into my very bones. It wasn't a threatening touch. It was possessive, protective. "They look at you and see a flaw," he murmured, his voice a low rumble right beside my ear. His breath stirred the fine hairs on my neck. "They see a ruin." My eyes stung with unshed tears. He was speaking my deepest fears aloud. Then he leaned down, and I felt the brush of his fingers against my neck, right on the edge of the scar. My breath hitched, my heart hammering against my ribs. His touch was not gentle, not tentative. It was deliberate, his calloused fingertips tracing the raised, puckered line of skin with a strange, unnerving reverence. The Queen's tear diamond felt cold as ice against my throat, but his touch was a brand of living fire. "I see a survivor," he whispered, his voice thick with an emotion I couldn't decipher. "I see a fire that was not extinguished." His touch was a paradox, both terrifying and anchoring. The calloused pads of his fingers traced the map of my ruin, with a possessiveness that sent a tremor through my entire body. My wolf, a creature starved for any kind of connection, pressed against the walls of my soul, whining softly, a desperate, yearning sound. She recognized the gesture for what it was, not an assessment of a flaw, but the claiming of a territory. I squeezed my eyes shut, 100 conflicting emotions warring within me, fear, confusion, and a tiny, treacherous spark of something that felt dangerously like hope. He did not move away. His hands remained on my shoulders, his body a warm, solid presence behind me, creating a shield between me and the rest of the world. The scent of him, ozone, stone, and the deep, wild musk of his awakening wolf was an intoxicating fog that clouded my senses. For a moment, just a moment, I allowed myself to lean back into his strength, to feel the safety of being caged by an apex predator who had, for some inexplicable reason, decided I was his. "Eat," he commanded, his voice a low rumble near my ear. It wasn't a suggestion. It was the order of a king, yes, but it was also the growl of an alpha concerned with his mate's welfare. The word broke the spell. Mate. The thought was a splash of icy water. I was not his mate. I was a political pawn, a ghost sent to haunt the chambers of his dead Luna. This strange connection, this pull between our wolves, was an aberration, a fluke, a symptom of two broken souls echoing each other's pain. I stiffened, pulling away from his touch, and his hands dropped from my shoulders instantly, as if he sensed my rejection. The loss of his warmth was immediate and profound, leaving me feeling cold and exposed. I picked up my fork, my movements jerky and unnatural, and forced a piece of quail into my mouth. It tasted like ash. I chewed and swallowed, the simple act requiring all of my concentration. Rowan returned to his seat, his gray eyes watching my every move. The silence stretched again, but it had changed. Before, it had been empty. Now it was charged with the energy of what had just passed between us, with the feel of his skin on mine. "Tell me about your pack," he said, his voice softer now, less commanding. "The Dravens, they were known for their healers, were they not?" The question was so unexpected, so normal, that it took me a moment to process it. No one had asked me about my pack since the fire. People avoided the subject, as if speaking of the dead would summon their ghosts. "Yes, Your Majesty," I replied, my voice still shaky. "My mother was the pack's chief healer. She knew the properties of every root and leaf in the southern forests." "And your father?" "He was the Omega Prime, the heart of the pack. He kept the peace." A lump formed in my throat. The memories were a double-edged sword, bringing both the warmth of love and the sharp, stabbing pain of loss. He could calm a territorial dispute between two hot-headed betas with a quiet word and a shared meal. He said that a pack's strength wasn't in the sharpness of its claws, but in the bonds that held it together. A shadow passed over Rowan's face. He was a wise man. The words were quiet, freighted with the weight of his own fractured kingdom, the bonds he had failed to keep from snapping. A king's strength is measured by the same metric. We spoke more after that. He guided the conversation with a surprising gentleness, asking about my childhood, about the traditions of my pack, about the forests I had once called home. I found myself answering, the words coming more easily as the minutes passed. I told him about the moon-weaving ceremony my pack performed at the winter solstice, a ritual of mending and renewal. I described the scent of the ghost orchids that grew only in the deepest parts of our woods. I spoke of a life that felt as if it belonged to another person, a girl who had not yet been introduced to fire and ash. He listened. He truly listened, his gaze never leaving my face, his attention absolute. He did not offer pity or empty platitudes. He simply took in my words, my history, and held them. For the first time in years, I felt seen. I felt real. The knot in my stomach began to loosen, and I ate, my appetite returning with a startling suddenness. When the meal was over, he rose. "Walk with me," he said. I followed him out of the dining room, not to the main corridors, but through a small private door that led into the castle gardens. The night air was cool and crisp, a welcome relief after the stuffy formality of the castle. Here, under the vast, star-dusted sky, the moon was no longer a sterile disk. It was a benevolent, powerful presence, its silver light spilling over the manicured hedges and stone pathways, making everything gleam as if it were coated in frost. The gardens were Lyra's, I knew. The design was too personal, too full of life, to have been a mere courtier's work. White roses, their petals glowing in the moonlight, climbed the ancient stone walls, releasing their sweet, ghostly perfume into the air. A marble fountain murmured in the center of a courtyard, its water catching the moonlight like liquid silver. It was a place of peace, of beauty. It was her sanctuary, and I was invading it with him. We walked in silence for a time, our footsteps crunching softly on the gravel path. Rowan's presence was different out here. The weight of his crown seemed to have been left inside. He moved with a looser, more natural grace, his shoulders not quite as tense. His gaze swept over the gardens with a profound sadness that was so palpable it was almost a physical ache in my chest. "Lyra made this place," he said, his voice low, confirming my suspicion. "She said the stone of the citadel needed a living heart. She planted every rosebush herself." He stopped beside a bench carved from a single piece of white marble, running a hand over its smooth, cold surface. "We used to sit here, after the court had gone to sleep. We would just be." The pain in his voice was a raw, open wound. My omega instincts surged, an overwhelming need to offer comfort, to soothe the hurt in this powerful, grieving alpha. But what could I say? What comfort could I, a stranger, a replacement, possibly offer? "It is beautiful," I whispered, the words inadequate. He turned to look at me, his face half in shadow, half in moonlight. "She would have liked you," he said, and the words stunned me. She was an omega too, not like the court ladies, all whispers and sharp edges. She was like you, quiet strength, a gentle heart. He looked away back at the garden, but the war took that from her. Toward the end, she became hard, brittle. The kingdom's pain became her own. I think it broke her long before the blade ever touched her. My own heart ached for him, for her, for the love they had lost. I understood that kind of breaking. I knew what it was to feel the core of your being crack under the weight of a world that was too cruel. "My wolf misses her," he confessed, his voice barely a whisper. "But he does not howl for her ghost. He howls for you." He looked at me again, and the confusion, the conflict was stark in his eyes. "Why? Why you, Celine, a scarred girl from a dead pack? What does he see in you that I cannot?" The raw honesty of his question left me breathless. He wasn't just confused. He was desperate for an answer. The bond his wolf felt was a betrayal of his grief, a mystery he was compelled to solve. "I don't know," I answered truthfully, my voice trembling. "My own wolf. She has been a ghost inside me since the fire, but tonight, when you are near, she is awake. She is not afraid." He stepped closer to me, crossing the small space between us in a single fluid motion. He raised a hand, not to my scar this time, but to the necklace at my throat. His fingers brushed against the queen's tear, the diamond cold against his warm skin. "This was hers, he said, his voice thick with memory. "I gave it to her on our mating night. They say it was carved from a fallen star, that it holds the light of the moon itself." His thumb stroked the smooth, cool surface of the stone, his knuckles brushing the sensitive skin of my throat. I held my breath, my pulse rabbiting against his touch. "When she died," he continued, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper, "it turned dark. The light within it went out. It has been a cold, dead thing for 3 years." He looked from the diamond up to my eyes, his gaze burning with a startling intensity. "But tonight, on you, it shines." My gaze dropped to the necklace. He was right. The diamond was no longer just reflecting the moonlight. It was radiating a soft internal luminescence of its own, a gentle, milky white glow that seemed to pulse in time with my heartbeat. It was impossible, a trick of the light, but it wasn't. The light was real, and it was coming from the stone. Rowan's hand moved from the necklace to cup the side of my face, his thumb stroking my cheekbone. His touch was no longer just possessive. It was reverent, wondering. "What are you?" he breathed, the question not meant for me, but for the universe, for the fates that had brought me here. My wolf surged forward, a wave of pure primal instinct. She was tired of the pain, the fear, the hiding. She saw in his eyes not a king, not a grieving widower, but an alpha, her alpha, the one she was meant to soothe, to anchor, to claim as her own. Before I could think, before I could stop myself, I leaned into his touch, my body acting on a will that was not entirely my own. A low growl rumbled in his chest, a sound of pure masculine satisfaction. His other hand came up to my waist, pulling me closer until my body was flush against his. The solid wall of his chest was a shock of heat against my breasts. I could feel the powerful, steady beat of his heart through his tunic. The world narrowed to this single point in time, to the scent of him, the feel of him, the impossible light of the diamond pulsing between us. His head lowered, his intentions clear. My breath caught, my lips parting in silent anticipation. This was madness, a betrayal of his dead Luna, a foolish surrender for a girl who had nothing left to give. But my body, my wolf, did not care about logic. They only cared about this. Just as his lips were about to touch mine, a shout echoed from the castle walls. "Your Majesty, an urgent message from the northern ridge!" The moment shattered. Rowan stiffened, his head snapping up toward the sound. The possessive fire in his eyes was instantly banked, replaced by the cold, hard mask of the king. He released me so abruptly I stumbled back a step, the loss of his support leaving me dizzy. A guard captain was running toward us across the lawn, his armor clanking in the silent garden. He skidded to a halt a respectful distance away, breathing heavily. "King Rowan, the sentinels have been found. All of them. They're dead. It's the hunters, sire. They've crossed the border." The words hung in the cold night air like shards of ice. Hunters. Dead. The idyllic peace of the moonlit garden was instantly obliterated, replaced by the grim, metallic scent of impending violence. The warmth that had bloomed between us vanished, consumed by a sudden, arctic chill. Rowan's entire demeanor shifted in a heartbeat. The conflicted man was gone, erased. In his place stood the king, the warrior, his body coiled with a lethal tension that was terrifying to behold. His face was a mask of cold fury, his gray eyes turning to flint. "How many?" he demanded, his voice a low, deadly growl that held no trace of the man who had moments ago whispered of fallen stars. "A full patrol, Your Majesty," the guard captain reported, his voice tight with grim urgency. 12 of our best, found an hour ago near the old pass. They were butchered. Silver." A muscle jumped in Rowan's jaw. Silver. The word was a curse, a poison, the one substance that could kill a shifter with agonizing slowness, burning through flesh and bone, negating their healing abilities. It was the signature of the Order of the Silver Blade, a fanatical sect of human hunters who believed all shifters were abominations to be eradicated. They had been a plague on the borders for generations, but they had not dared a direct incursion into Valhart lands since Rowan's father put down their last uprising a decade ago. This was not a random raid. This was a declaration of war. "Sound the alarm," Rowan commanded, his voice ringing with absolute authority. "Double the sentries on every wall. I want the War Council assembled in the strategy chamber in 10 minutes. And send a rider to my Alpha Kalen at the northern garrison. Tell him to lock down the entire border. Nothing gets in or out." "Yes, Your Majesty." The captain bowed sharply and sprinted back toward the citadel, his footsteps echoing the new, frantic pulse of the castle. Rowan stood for a moment, his back to me, staring into the darkness toward the northern mountains, as if he could see the carnage with his own eyes. The silence he left in his wake was more fearsome than any shout. The power rolling off him was immense, a physical pressure that made the air feel thin and hard to breathe. His wolf was no longer a gentle thrum beneath his skin. It was a raging storm, a palpable aura of restrained violence that promised retribution. I felt utterly useless, a fragile piece of porcelain in a room full of crashing boulders. The almost kiss, the pulsing diamond, the whispered confessions, they all felt like scenes from a dream, flimsy and unreal in the face of this brutal reality. I was a stranger here, an outsider. This was not my fight, not my council, not my kingdom to defend. I wrapped my arms around myself, the silk of the gown feeling suddenly flimsy, offering no protection at all. Finally, he turned. The look in his eyes made me take an involuntary step back. They were the eyes of a predator who had caught the scent of blood. They swept over me, and for a heart-stopping second, it felt as though he didn't even see me, as if I were just another part of the scenery. The king had completely subsumed the man. "Go inside," he said, his voice flat and hard. "Return to your chambers. Lock the door." It was a dismissal, an order to a possession to be put away for safekeeping while the important work was done. A bitter, familiar shame washed over me. He had been right. I was a symbol, a pawn. And now that a real threat had emerged, the game was over. I was to be put back in my bot. I nodded mutely, unable to find my voice. I turned to walk away, my heart a cold, heavy stone in my chest. The Queen's terror felt like a lead weight on my neck. its faint light a mockery of the intimacies that had been stolen from us. "Celine," his voice stopped me. I paused, my back still to him. "Stay away from the council members," he said, his tone clipped and hard. "Especially Boren, trust no one." The warning was so stark, so specific, it sent a shiver down my spine. It wasn't just a general caution, it was a targeted accusation. He believed the timing of this attack was not a coincidence. He believed someone inside his own court, someone on his own council, was a traitor. And his first instinct was to warn me, to protect me. I turned back to look at him, my confusion warring with a new kind of fear. He was already moving, striding toward the citadel, with a long, ground-eating pace that spoke of years of command. He didn't look back. In seconds, he was swallowed by the shadows of the castle, leaving me alone in the ghostly white garden. The Luna's chambers no longer felt like a sanctuary. They felt like a cage. The beautiful tapestries, the plush rugs, the silver-backed brush on the vanity, they all seemed to mock me with their silent testimony to a life I was not living, a love I was not worthy of. I obeyed his command, locking the heavy oak door, the sound of the bolt sliding home, echoing the feeling of being trapped. I paced the length of the room like a captured animal, the adrenaline from the garden still singing in my veins. The castle outside my rooms was no longer silent. I could hear the distant, urgent ringing of bells, the sound of running feet in the corridors, the shouted commands of the castle guard. The entire citadel was mobilizing, transforming from a place of grieving memory into a fortress preparing for a siege. Sleep was impossible. My mind raced, replaying every moment with Rowan, the touch of his hand on my scar, the raw pain in his voice when he spoke of Lyra, the heat in his eyes in the garden, the impossible light in the diamond, and the chilling finality of his warning, "Trust no one." My wolf was as restless as I was. She paced within me, hackles raised, her senses on high alert. She was not afraid of the hunters. She was agitated, protective. Her focus wasn't on the external threat, but on the alpha who had gone to face it. She felt his danger, his rage, as if it were her own, a phantom echo across the castle stones. An inexplicable urge to go to him, to stand by his side, was so strong it was a physical ache. It was madness. I was a healer, not a warrior. An Omega, not a Beta guard. I would be a liability, a weakness. I tore the Queen's tear from my neck, the cold weight of it suddenly unbearable. I placed it back in its velvet box and slammed the lid shut. I would not be her ghost. I would not wear her jewels while men were dying on the border. I stripped off the suffocating silk gown and pulled on the simple wool dress I had arrived in. It was scratchy and plain, but it was mine. It felt honest. Hours passed. The moon arced across the sky, its light shifting through the room. The sounds of mobilization within the castle eventually quieted, replaced by a tense, watchful silence. I sat in a high-backed chair by the window, staring out at the dark line of the northern mountains, my thoughts a tangled, chaotic mess. Who was I in this place? Was I the king's intended, the future Luna he was inexplicably drawn to? Or was I a political convenience, a temporary distraction to be discarded when his grief finally subsided, or a real war demanded his full attention? And what of his wolf's reaction to me? Was it truly a sign of a destined bond, or simply the desperate cry of a lonely creature reaching out to the first new sympathetic presence it had encountered in years? My own wolf's fierce, protective response to him felt just as confusing. It was an instinct so deep, so primal, it bypassed all my fear and logic. It simply was. A faint scratching sound at the door startled me from my thoughts. It wasn't a knock. It was a furtive, secretive noise. I froze, my heart leaping into my throat. Rowan's warning echoed in my mind. Trust no one. I crept to the door, my bare feet silent on the thick rug. Who is it? I whispered, my voice tight. It is I, Lord Boren, a voice hissed from the other side. I must have a word with you. It is a matter of great urgency. My blood ran cold. Boren, the very man Rowan had warned me against. The king commanded me to remain here, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He is not to be disturbed. This concerns the king. Boren's voice grew more insistent, though he kept it low. His safety is in jeopardy. The council is worried. His judgment has been clouded since your arrival. This sudden attack by the hunters is no coincidence. There are forces at play you do not understand. Please, my lady, let me explain. His words were slick, designed to sound reasonable, to prey on my ignorance and fear. But Rowan's warning had been a shield. My instincts screamed at me that this man was a snake. Go away, I said, my voice firmer now, or I will call the guard. There was a long silence from the other side of the door. Then a low, frustrated hiss. You foolish girl, you think he chose you. He is cursed. His grief has made him mad. He will drag you down with him. The footsteps receded down the corridor, leaving me shaking, my back pressed against the cold wood of the door. Cursed? Mad? The words were poison, meant to sow doubt, but they only solidified my resolve. Rowan had trusted me with a warning. The least I could do was honor that trust. I turned from the door, my mind made up. I could not sit here in this gilded cage while the fate of the kingdom, and the man whose wolf called to mine, was being decided in the shadows. I would not be a pawn. I had to know what was happening. I had to find a way to help. My mother had taught me more than just herbs and poultices. She had taught me how to listen, how to observe. And in a court full of secrets and lies, a quiet Omega who everyone underestimated could be the most dangerous spy of all. I looked around the room, my eyes falling on the balcony. The drop was sheer, 100 feet to the stone courtyard below, but it connected to a narrow stone ledge that ran along the side of the spire. A dangerous, foolish path. A path no one would ever expect me to take. My fear was a cold knot in my stomach, but for the first time in 3 years, it was overshadowed by something else. A fierce, burning purpose. I was a survivor, and survivors did not wait in locked rooms for their fate to be decided by others. The wind was a living thing, a hungry beast that clawed at the stone of the high spire. It tore at my simple wool dress, whipping my hair across my face and trying to pry my fingers from their desperate grip. The ledge was barely the width of my 2 feet, slick with the night's dampness. Below, the courtyard was a dizzying, fatal drop, a square of darkness punctuated by the distant, flickering torchlight of the guards. Every instinct screamed at me to retreat, to crawl back into the relative safety of the Luna's chambers. But the image of Rowan's face, hard and resolute as he walked into the heart of the storm, propelled me forward. My bare feet, toughened by a childhood spent running through forests, were a small mercy. I could feel the gritty texture of the stone, the subtle shifts in the surface. I moved slowly, my back pressed against the cold, rough wall of the tower, my gaze fixed on the point where the ledge widened near a darkened, arched window. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs, a counterpoint to the howling of the wind. This was a fool's errand. What could I, a wolfless, powerless Omega, possibly do? But my own wolf, so long a timid ghost, was a silent, steady presence within me. She was not afraid of the height. Her fear was for the alpha, for the nascent pack bond that had been forged in a single glance. Her fear was of being useless. The window was unlatched, a small blessing from the fates. I slid it open with a soft groan of protesting wood and slipped inside, tumbling onto a cold stone floor in a dark, silent chamber. I lay there for a moment, my breath coming in ragged gasps, my body trembling with adrenaline. The room smelled of old parchment, dust, and beeswax. A library or a study. I rose to my feet, my senses on high alert, and crept toward the door. Listening, I could hear the faint, muffled sound of voices from down the corridor, the War Council. The door opened onto a gallery that overlooked the strategy chamber. It was a space designed for observers, hidden behind a heavy tapestry that allowed one to see and hear without being seen. I knelt in the shadows, my eye to a small gap in the weave. The room below was a pool of golden light in the vast darkness of the castle. A massive table carved with a topographical map of the kingdom dominated the center. Around it stood the most powerful men in Valhart, the War Council. There was Kalen, the alpha of the King's Guard, his face a grim landscape of scars, his arms crossed over his massive chest. There was old Lord Valerius, his face wizened, his eyes sharp and intelligent. And there, his back to the fireplace, was Lord Boren, his expression a mask of concerned gravity that I now saw as utterly false. And then there was Rowan. He was the center of the room, the axis around which they all turned. He leaned over the table, his finger tracing a line on the map. The northern ridge. The firelight caught the harsh planes of his face, casting his eyes into shadow, but the sheer force of his presence was a physical thing, a crushing weight that filled the chamber. The grief-stricken king was gone. This was the Alpha who had torn a kingdom from the brink of collapse. "No survivors to interrogate," Kalen was saying, his voice a low growl. The hunters were clean. They used silver arrows from a distance, then moved in to finish the job. They took nothing, left nothing but the bodies. It was a message. "A message of defiance," Lord Valerius added, stroking his white beard. "To strike so deep, so close to the solstice. They grow bold. They must have a new leader, or new funding. Or inside help," Rowan said, his voice dangerously quiet. Every man in the room stilled. Rowan straightened, his gaze sweeping over each of their faces, lingering for a fraction of a second too long on Boren. 12 of my best shifters, on a patrol route known only to this council, were ambushed with perfect timing. They did not have time to shift. They did not have time to send a warning flare. This was an execution, planned with intimate knowledge of our defenses. Lord Boren was the first to speak, his voice oozing a practiced outrage. "Your Majesty, surely you do not suspect one of us. We have all bled for this kingdom. We all mourned with you when—" He let the sentence hang, a veiled reference to Lyra, a disgusting attempt to use the king's own grief as a shield. "I suspect everyone," Rowan countered, his voice like chipping ice. "The crown has taught me that much. The Order of the Silver Blade is a pack of human fanatics. But they are not fools. They would not risk an open war with us unless they were certain of an advantage, a weakness in our ranks." He began to pace, his movements those of a caged wolf. The raw power emanating from him was almost suffocating, even from my hiding place. "This attack was designed to draw me out, to pull our forces to the northern border, leaving the citadel weakened. They want something here, in the capital." "What could they possibly want?" Valerius asked. "The treasury is secure, the armory is on high alert." Rowan stopped pacing and slammed his fist down on the table. The sound was like a thunderclap. The wooden map shuddered, and the council members flinched. "They want the Omega," he roared, the sound no longer human, but the full-throated snarl of an enraged alpha. The sound ripped through me, a primal shockwave that made my own wolf howl in answer, a silent cry of fury and fear that only I could hear. He was looking directly at Boren now, his eyes blazing with a silver light, the power of his wolf barely contained. "You were so eager to bring her here, Boren. An Omega survivor with no political allies, you said. A perfect, placid symbol to calm the people. Or was she the perfect bait? Did you parade her before the court to announce to your hunter friends that the prize was finally within their grasp?" Boren paled, his composure shattering. "This is madness, an accusation without proof. I serve the throne." "You serve your own ambition," Rowan snarled. "The hunters have always believed that the Valhart line is intrinsically tied to a powerful Omega mate. They believe that by capturing and sacrificing the king's chosen, they can shatter the spiritual heart of the kingdom, making us vulnerable. They tried it with Lyra, and now you have served them up another offering." My blood turned to ice in my veins. Bait. I was bait. This wasn't just about a political marriage or a broken king's strange fascination. My life was a strategic piece in a deadly game. The hunters weren't just a threat on the border, they were coming for me. Boren sputtered, trying to defend himself, but Rowan cut him off. "Kalen, seize him, confine him to the dungeons. If he is innocent, he can plead his case to me after I have skinned the hunter leader alive." Kalen moved with brutal efficiency, grabbing Boren by the arm. The Lord struggled, his face a mask of terror and fury. "You are making a mistake, Rowan. Your grief has blinded you. She has bewitched you. She is a curse." The guards dragged him from the room, his shouts echoing down the corridor until they were cut off by the slamming of a heavy door. A tense, shocked silence fell over the chamber. Rowan stood with his back to the remaining council members, his shoulders heaving, his hands clenched into white-knuckled fists on the table's edge. He was fighting for control, wrestling the primal rage of his wolf back into its cage. The raw display of dominance, the absolute certainty of his accusation, left no room for doubt. When he finally spoke, his voice was strained, but the king's authority had returned. "The hunters believe they are hunting a symbol. They are wrong. They are hunting my mate." The words struck me with the force of a physical blow. My mate. He had said it. Not the Omega, not the girl. My mate. He said it with such conviction, such possessive finality, that it stole the air from my lungs. He was claiming me, not just before the court as a political necessity, but here, in the heart of his war council, as a fact of his own being. Old Valerius stepped forward cautiously. Your Majesty? The bond. It is true, then? Your wolf has chosen her. Rowan turned, and the silver fire in his eyes had softened, replaced by a look of grim, unshakable certainty. My wolf knew it the moment I saw her. I was the fool who tried to deny it. He looked up then, his gaze sweeping the room, passing over the gallery where I was hidden. For a breathtaking instant, I felt as if he could see me, as if his senses could pierce the shadows and the tapestry and find me there, trembling in the darkness. They think to break this kingdom by taking her. Let them try. They will find that the heart of this kingdom has teeth. He pushed away from the table. Kaelin will handle the city's defenses. Valerius, use your network of spies. I want to know everything about this new hunter leader. I am going to the northern ridge. I will see the site of the massacre myself. I will find their trail. You cannot go alone, Majesty, Valerius protested. It is a trap. I will not be alone. Rowan said, a low growl underpinning his words. My wolf has been silent for 3 years. Tonight he wants to hunt. He strode from the room, leaving his council to stare after him, their faces a mixture of awe and terror. He was going to face the hunters himself, fueled by a rage and a power that had been reawakened by me. I stayed frozen in the darkness long after the chamber had emptied, my mind reeling. Mate. He had claimed me as his mate. The word echoed in the empty space, in the chambers of my heart. It was a terrifying, exhilarating weight. It meant that this bond, this pull, was not just a fluke of 2 broken souls. It was real. A fated, primal connection that neither of us could deny, and it had just painted a target on my back. I had to get back to my room before he found me gone. I scrambled back out the window, my movements clumsy with haste and shock. The wind on the ledge seemed colder now, the drop more terrifying. As I slid back through the window of the Luna's chambers, my foot caught on the hem of my dress, and I fell, crying out as my knee struck the hard floor. The door to the chamber burst open. Rowan stood there, silhouetted against the corridor light, his body radiating a furious energy. His eyes, blazing with that silver wolf light, immediately found me on the floor, my hand clutching my throbbing knee, the open balcony door revealing my insane escape. The fury in his face was instantly replaced by a wave of raw, possessive panic. He crossed the room in 2 strides, dropping to his knees beside me. His hands hovered over me, not sure where to touch, as if I might break. Celine, what in the hells were you doing? He snarled, his voice a mixture of rage and terror. The ledge? Are you mad? He saw the scrape on my knee, the wildness in my eyes, and his expression hardened with a dawning, horrified comprehension. You heard, he whispered. You heard it all. I could only nod, my throat tight with unshed tears. The truth of my situation, of his claim, of the mortal danger we were both in, was crashing down on me. He didn't scold me. He didn't yell. He did something far more devastating. He gathered me into his arms, pulling me against his hard chest, as if he meant to absorb me into himself. He held me tightly, his face buried in my hair, one hand cradling the back of my head. The raw, unshakable strength of him surrounded me, a fortress against the fear. I could feel the frantic, heavy beat of his heart against my cheek. They will not have you, he growled, the words a sacred vow spoken into my hair. I will burn their entire order to ash before I let them lay a single hand on you. He pulled back just enough to look at me, his hands framing my face. The silver light in his eyes was soft now, a swirling mist of emotion so intense it made my soul ache. The king was gone again. The warrior was gone. It was only the man, the alpha, his eyes full of a terrifying, beautiful, and utterly consuming truth. My mate, he breathed, his thumb stroking my cheek. And then, with no hesitation, no war, no memory of a ghost between them, his lips came down and captured mine. His kiss was not gentle. It was a storm, a claiming, a desperate and primal collision of two souls who had been starving for a lifetime. It was the heat of the fire and the cool relief of the rain all at once. His lips were firm, demanding, moving against mine with a certainty that left no room for thought, only feeling. One of his hands tangled in my hair, tilting my head back, while the other slid down my spine, pressing me so tightly against him that I could feel the coiled power in every muscle of his body. All the fear, all the confusion, all the loneliness of the past 3 years dissolved in that single, searing moment of contact. My wolf, my timid, broken wolf, rose up within me not with a whimper, but with a triumphant roar that echoed his own. She met the soul-deep claim of his wolf with an unreserved surrender that was its own form of strength. This was right. This was true. This was the missing piece of my shattered soul. My hands, which had been trapped between our bodies, came up to fist in the rough fabric of his tunic, holding on as if he were the only solid thing in a world that had turned to mist. I kissed him back with all the pent-up grief and burgeoning hope that I possessed. A clumsy, desperate reply to his raw, possessive power. It was not the tender kiss of a courtly romance. It was the savage, necessary kiss of two survivors finding an anchor in the midst of a war. He broke the kiss with a ragged gasp, resting his forehead against mine. His breath was warm and unsteady against my lips. We stayed like that for a long moment, kneeling on the cold floor of the Luna's chambers. The world outside, the hunters, the traitors, the waiting war, held at bay by the sheer force of the bond that now crackled between us, a visible, tangible thing. "You feel it," he murmured, his voice thick and raw. It was not a question. The bond, it's solidifying. Your presence. It's like a fire in my blood. It's mending something I thought was dead forever. I could feel it too. It was a golden cord, spinning and strengthening in my core, tying me to him. It was a sense of profound peace overlaid with a fierce, terrifying protectiveness. His pain was my pain. His rage was my rage. I looked into his eyes, no longer winter gray, but molten silver with the light of his wolf, and saw my own reflection. I was no longer just Celine Draven, the scarred Omega. I was his. He was mine. We were a pack of two. He helped me to my feet, his touch gentle now, almost reverent. His gaze fell to my scraped knee, and a low growl rumbled in his chest. Before I could protest, he swept me into his arms, carrying me as if I weighed nothing, and laid me gently on the massive bed. The scent of lyra, of dried roses and old memories, still lingered in the fine linens, but it was faint now. A ghost's whisper easily banished by the overwhelming living presence of Rowan. He fetched a cloth and a basin of water from the washroom, his movements efficient and sure. He knelt beside the bed and began to clean the scrape on my knee with a tenderness that seemed at odds with the warrior who had just condemned a man to the dungeons. His large, calloused hands were surprisingly gentle on my skin. "I am going to the northern ridge," he said, his eyes fixed on his task. I have to see what they did. I have to find a scent, a track, anything that will lead me to them." "Valeria said it's a trap," I whispered, my hand resting on his broad shoulder. I could feel the tension in him, the barely contained violence simmering just beneath the surface. "It is," he agreed, his voice grim. He looked up at me, his face a mask of cold resolve. "They want the king. They will get the alpha. My wolf has been caged for too long, Celine. He needs to run. He needs to hunt. He needs to remind them why our borders have been inviolate for a decade." Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through the warm glow of the newly cemented bond. "Don't go," I begged, the words selfish and weak, but I couldn't stop them. The thought of him facing the hunters, of silver arrows and hidden traps, was a physical agony. He placed a hand over mine on his shoulder, his grip firm and reassuring. "I have to. To leave this unanswered would be a sign of weakness. It would invite more attacks. It would put you in even greater danger." He paused, his gaze boring into mine. "But I am not leaving you unprotected. Kalen is the best warrior I have. He and 20 of my personal guard will be stationed outside this door. No one enters. No one. Not the council, not the servants, no one but me. Do you understand?" I nodded, my throat tight. I will be back by sunrise, he vowed. And when I return, we will deal with the vipers in our own den. And then we will deal with us. He leaned in and pressed a firm, chaste kiss to my forehead. It was a promise, a brand. He stood and walked to the door, pausing with his hand on the latch. He looked back at me, his face a conflict of duty and desire. "Lock this door behind me," he commanded, "and do not, under any circumstances, climb out on the ledge again." A ghost of a smile touched his lips, the first I had ever seen. It transformed his harsh face, hinting at the man he had been before grief had carved him from stone. And then he was gone. I did as he commanded, sliding the heavy bolt home. The silence that descended was different now. It was not empty. The bond thrummed between us, a constant, reassuring presence, even with him gone. I could feel him, not his thoughts, but his emotional state, a distant, seething rage, a sharp focus, and beneath it all, a steady, protective warmth directed at me. I could not rest. I paced the room, my mind a whirl. The hunters wanted to sacrifice me to break the kingdom's spirit. Lord Boren, or someone on the council, was in league with them, and Rowan, my mate, was walking into a trap to avenge his fallen men and protect me. I was the key. My presence here, my bond with Rowan, was the catalyst for this entire crisis. But I refused to be the victim. I refused to be the helpless damsel locked in a tower. I was an Omega of the Draven pack. My father had taught me peace, but my mother had taught me remedies, and some remedies required cutting out the poison before it could spread. Rowan had seen Boren's treachery, but Boren had been too obvious, his outrage too theatrical. What if he was just a piece of the puzzle? Rowan's warning came back to me. Trust no one. He had suspected Boren, but his warning had been plural, council members. My mind raced back to the strategy chamber, to Lord Valerius, the wise old advisor. He had seemed loyal, his concern for Rowan genuine. But he was a spy master. His entire life was a web of secrets and misdirection. He had been the one to so quickly accept the idea of a new leader or new funding for the hunters, deflecting from the possibility of an internal betrayal until Rowan forced the issue. It was a subtle thing, but in a court of snakes, subtlety was everything. I had to be sure. I went to the wardrobe, the repository of Lyra's life. I ignored the beautiful gowns and searched the drawers. An Omega Queen, a healer at heart, would have more than just silks and jewels. Tucked away at the very bottom of a chest of winter cloaks, I found it, a small leather-bound satchel. Inside were not perfumes and cosmetics, but vials of dried herbs, bandages, and a small sharp silver knife for cutting poultices. And hidden in a secret compartment in the lid was a small, heavy key. It was not ornate like the key to the chambers. It was plain, iron, and old. A key for a servant's passage, a secret way out. I knew with a sudden, chilling certainty where it led. Lyra, the Omega Queen who felt the kingdom's pain as her own, would have needed a way to move through the castle unseen, to listen, to observe, to be the quiet, watchful heart of the court. The key fit a nearly invisible lock set into the stone of the hearth. A section of the wall swung inward, revealing a dark, narrow passage, choked with cobwebs and the smell of cold, dead air. A torch and flint lay just inside. Lighting it, I took a deep breath and stepped into the darkness, pulling the stone door shut behind me. The passage twisted and turned, sloping downwards. Faint sounds from the main castle filtered through the walls, the clang of armor, the murmur of voices, reminding me that I was moving through the citadel's secret veins. I had no destination in mind, only a desperate need to find proof, to find something that could help Rowan when he returned. The passage ended at a wooden grate set high in the wall of a corridor. Peering through, I recognized the hallway that led to the council's private chambers, and standing outside Lord Valerius's door, speaking in low, urgent tones, were two men. One was Valerius's personal guard. The other was a servant I had never seen before, a man with cold, dead eyes and a faint, thin scar on his upper lip. "The king is gone," the servant was saying, his voice a venomous whisper. "He took the bait just as the master predicted. He rides for the northern ridge." "And the Omega?" the guard asked. "Locked in the spire, under the protection of the Alpha's pet, Kaelin, impregnable for now. But the master says to be patient. The king will return weakened from his fight with the decoy hunters. and in the chaos of his return, we will strike. Lord Valerius will call an emergency council. Kaelin will be drawn away from her door, and you will let our men into the tower. And Boren? The servant sneered. Boren was a useful fool, a loud, ambitious target to draw the king's suspicion. Let him rot in the dungeon. His purpose is served. My blood ran cold. It was Valerius, the wise old man, the loyal advisor. He was the traitor. Boren was just a distraction. The attack on the northern ridge was a decoy, meant to draw Rowan away and exhaust him. The real attack was planned for here, for me. I backed away from the grate, my heart pounding with a cold, terrifying dread. I had to warn someone. But who? Kaelin was loyal to Rowan, but he was a soldier. He would not abandon his post on the word of a strange Omega he had never met, especially if it meant disobeying the king's direct order. He would think it was a trick. I was alone. I had only one choice: to get back to the tower, to barricade myself in, and to pray that Rowan would survive the trap and return before Valerius's plan came to fruition. I turned to race back up the secret passage, but a new sound stopped me. A faint scratching from further down the dark tunnel. It was not the sound of a rat. It was the sound of stone grating on stone. Someone else was in the passage with me. My torchlight fell upon a section of the wall that was swinging open, revealing not the inside of the castle, but the cold, star-dusted night sky. It was a secret exit, leading out onto the castle battlements, and framed in the opening was the servant with the scarred lip, a long, silver-bladed knife gleaming in his hand. His cold eyes met mine, and a slow, cruel smile spread across his face. "The master thought you might be resourceful," he hissed. "It seems he was right. Such a pity you won't live to tell anyone." The assassin's smile was the last thing I saw before the world dissolved into a blur of motion. He lunged, the silver knife a streak of deadly light in the gloom of the passage. My scream was trapped in my throat, a knot of pure terror. Lyra's small blade was still in my hand, a pathetic sliver of metal against his practiced malice. But it was silver. Acting on pure, desperate instinct, I threw myself to the side, not away from him, but toward him, jamming the small knife into the soft flesh of his thigh as he passed. He roared, a sound of shock and pain, and the silver bite of the blade made him stumble. It wasn't a fatal wound, not even a disabling one, but it was unexpected. It bought me a second. I didn't run back the way I'd come, toward the safety of the locked room that was now a trap. I scrambled through the opening he had made, out onto the high, wind-swept battlements of the citadel. The wind screamed around me, a gale at this height, threatening to tear me from the stone. The assassin was right behind me, his face contorted in a mask of fury, the silver knife now in his hand. I was trapped. To my left, a sheer drop into the sleeping city. To my right, the crenellated wall leading into darkness, and behind me, death. My terror was a physical thing, a shard of ice in my soul, and it screamed out for the only person in the world who could hear it: Rowan. I didn't speak his name, I felt it. A desperate, silent plea sent across the golden cord of our new bond. And miles away, in the cold darkness of the northern ridge, he felt it. He felt it as a white-hot lance of agony in his gut. A psychic scream that was more real than the wind on his face. His wolf, which had been tracking the faint, misleading scent of the decoy hunters, reared up inside him with a cataclysmic roar. The bond, so new and bright, was screaming a single silent word: danger, mate, home. He knew. In that instant, he knew the massacre was a feint, the trail a lie. The real hunt was at the castle. The real prey was her. With a snarl that was no longer human, he wrenched his horse around, leaving his men to stare in confusion, and rode like a demon back toward the heart of his kingdom, his wolf lending its preternatural speed to the desperate charge. On the battlements, I was out of time. The assassin cornered me against the parapet, the drop yawning behind me. His cold eyes glittered. "The master sends his regards," he hissed, raising the blade. I squeezed my eyes shut, my last thought a silent apology to a king I had only just found. A sound cut through the wind, not a shout but the lethal thwump of a heavy crossbow bolt finding its mark. The assassin's eyes widened in shock. He looked down at the black-fletched quarrel protruding from his chest, a choked gurgle escaping his lips. He teetered for a moment, a stunned expression on his face, and then fell backward over the wall, vanishing into the darkness without another sound. I collapsed against the stone, shaking uncontrollably. Standing at the far end of the battlement, a massive war crossbow held loosely in one hand, was Rowan. He wasn't in armor, just the black tunic he had ridden out in, now covered in dirt and sweat. He must have ridden his horse to death and scaled the outer wall like a shadow. He was breathing heavily, his chest rising and falling, and his eyes, those silver wolf eyes, were fixed on me with an expression of such raw, violent relief that it stole my breath. He was there in 3 long strides, pulling me away from the edge, crushing me against his chest. His heart hammered against mine. "I felt you," he rasped into my hair, his voice shaking with the force of his terror. "I felt your fear. I swear by the moon, Celine, I will tear down this entire kingdom to keep you safe." But we both knew the danger wasn't over. It was just beginning. "Valerius!" I choked out, my voice raw. "It's Valerius. Boren was a decoy. They're going to attack the tower. They're coming for me." The look on his face was terrifying. The last vestiges of the grieving king were burned away, leaving only the pure, incandescent rage of the Alpha. "Then we will not wait for them in the tower," he growled, pulling me toward a dark archway. "We will hunt them in their own den." He led me not down the main stairs, but into the same secret passages I had just fled. They were his passages, I realized. The king's ways. He knew every twist and turn. As we moved through the castle's hidden arteries, we could hear the sounds of the coup beginning, shouts, the clash of steel, the alarm bells ringing a frantic, chaotic rhythm. Valerius had made his move. We emerged not in a hallway, but behind the great tapestry in the throne room. Below, the scene was one of high treason. Valerius stood before the throne, flanked by a dozen men wearing the silver insignia of the Hunter's Order on their arms. He was addressing the terrified members of the court and the few loyal guards Kaelin had not been able to rally. "The king, driven mad by his grief and bewitched by this foreign Omega, has abandoned his duties," Valerius proclaimed, his voice ringing with false piety. "He has ridden to his death. For the good of the kingdom, I, as Lord Regent, will take control. Our new allies from the Order will help us purge the shifter sickness from this land and restore human purity to the throne." "The only sickness on this throne, Valerius," Rowan's voice boomed from the shadows, "is you." We stepped from behind the tapestry. The gasp that went through the room was a collective shock. Rowan stood, tall and terrible, his eyes glowing with silver fire. I was at his side, my hand in his, not hiding behind him, but standing with him. We were a united front. The king and his Luna. Valerius's face went white with shock, then purple with rage. "Kill them!" he shrieked to his hunter allies. The battle was swift and brutal. Rowan was a storm of contained violence, his wolf's strength and speed a terrifying sight. But he was not alone. Kaelin and the Loyalists, hearing their king's voice, broke through the traitorous guards and joined the fray. I was not a warrior, but I was not useless. As the fight raged, I pulled the wounded Loyalists into the alcove, using the herbs and bandages from Lyra's satchel to staunch bleeding, to pack wounds, my healer's hands moving with a purpose I had not felt in years. In the end, Rowan stood over a disarmed and bleeding Valerius. The old lord looked up at his king, his eyes filled with a fanatic's hatred. "You are a dying breed," he spat, "an animal pretending to be a man. Your bond with that creature only proves it. We would have saved this kingdom from you." Rowan looked down at him, his face grim. "You tried to save it by tearing out its heart," he said, his voice low and cold. He looked at me then, across the blood-stained throne room, and the look in his eyes held all the promise of 1,000 sunrises. "But you were too late. The heart is stronger than you know." 1 year later, the throne room was unrecognizable. The heavy, dark tapestries had been replaced with banners of silver and green, the colors of the unified Valhart line. Sunlight, no longer a stranger, streamed through the high windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air and glinting off the polished floors. The room was not silent. It was filled with the low murmur of courtiers, the rustle of petitions, and the occasional burst of laughter. I stood beside the throne, not as a consort, but as Luna, my hand resting on the arm of my mate, my king. The charcoal gray gowns were a distant memory. Today I wore a dress the color of a spring forest, and the queen's tear lay against my throat. its inner light a steady, warm glow that pulsed with the beating of my heart. My scars were not hidden. They were a part of me, a testament to the fire I had walked through to find my way here. No one whispered. They saw not a broken Omega, but the queen who had helped heal a broken kingdom. Rowan was no longer a statue carved from grief. He was vibrant, alive. He ruled with a strength tempered by a new wisdom. His wolf a calm, confident presence just beneath his skin. He listened to his people, he dispensed justice with a fair hand, and he often turned to me, his gaze asking for my counsel, which I gave freely. We were two halves of a whole, his alpha strength balanced by my omega heart. That evening, we walked in the garden. It was no longer just Lyra's sanctuary of white roses. I had planted moon petal from the southern forests and wild lavender, their scents mingling with the roses to create something new, a fragrance that was a perfect blend of past and future, of his history and mine. Rowan stopped by the marble bench and pulled me into his arms, his embrace as strong and sure as the kingdom he had reclaimed. A year ago, he murmured into my hair. This garden was a graveyard of memories. Now it is simply home. I looked up at him, my heart so full of love it felt as if it might burst. We brought it back to life, together. He smiled, that rare, beautiful smile that was reserved only for me. He traced the line of the scar on my neck, his touch no longer one of awe or discovery, but of simple, profound love. He did not see the mark of the fire anymore. He only saw me. The crown he had never wanted was no longer a curse. It was a shared duty, a promise we renewed to our people and to each other every day. He leaned down and kissed me, a slow, deep kiss under the light of the benevolent moon, a kiss that held the quiet promise of 1,000 more to come. His wolf, so long silent, rumbled in his chest, a low, contented sound that was the true music of our kingdom, the song of a king who had found his mate and in doing so, had finally found his way home.